Good morning and welcome to Westminster Presbyterian Church's Adult Learning Hour. We're so glad you're here. This week, we'll be preparing for Reverend Blount's visit with us next week. Reverend Blount is the president of Union Presbyterian Seminary. And this past year, we have tuned into his voice to hear an honest and convicting challenge following the killing of George Floyd last May, and then teaching around the topic of witness again in his visit with Matt Skinner this summer for our series, Big Questions for a Changing Church. Guided by his rich knowledge of Revelations and the Gospel of Mark, Blount teaches us what it means to bear witness and encourages us to ask ourselves whether we are witnessing enough. In just a moment, the link to Blount's full statement on the death of George Floyd will be put into the chat so you can review it for yourself. But in the next few minutes, you will see a series of quotes from that statement and some questions for reflection. Next, there will be 2 short snippets from this conversation with Matt this summer. And following the video, when you see the Zoom link pop into the chat, please click continue to join us in a live conversation. To avoid confusion, we do ask that you mute or exit the live stream before you join the Zoom room. We look forward to hearing from you.
I want to start with the question of witness, and to put that in context, not everybody watching this will know, but you wrote a statement for the Union website, which also got picked up by a Presbyterian publication. People can find it pretty easily if they just Google Brian Blount, George Floyd, I believe it's the first thing that will pop up. But it's a statement in response to the murder of George Floyd. And you say boldly in this, that white Christians are not witnessing, not enough. Maybe you've said what you need to say already right there, but I'd love to unpack that a little bit and talk about this nature, or I'm sorry, the notion of this thing called bearing witness and where that comes from for you, and how we put some handles on that notion of what it means to bear witness right here, right now.
Yes, well, as you know, I've done a commentary and some other works on the book of Revelation, as you said at the beginning. And for me, the term and the concept come from a great deal of the work that I've done there using the language of martyreo in the Greek, the martyr language, the witness language, standing up and declaring one's relationship with God and with Christ. And in the book of Revelation, John's concern is that his followers in the 7 churches witness to the lordship of Jesus Christ in a context where that could be a very difficult and dangerous thing to do. It could cost you. It could cost you social standing, fellow peers in your social community turning their back on you because of how you were accused of being this Christ believer. It could cost you your position in society, or it could cost you your life. There were some people, Antipas, who is mentioned in the book, who was killed as a result. Also John, who's exiled on Patmos as a result. John points to Jesus as the first true witness, the one who stood up for his own lordship, his relationship to God, and was therefore crucified as a result. John is asking his believers to be willing to stand up for Jesus in the way that Jesus stood up for his own identity as God's Messiah and God's Son. His concern is that people in his churches are buying into the Roman, Greco-Roman way of life, so that they would rather blend into the Roman economy, the Roman religious and political infrastructure. They would like to be seen in a way that didn't bring danger to them in their lives. If the Romans wanted them to worship Greco-Roman gods, well, let's do that. Even if they understood and believed that their only true loyalty in terms of faith should be to Christ. So John is concerned because he knows that if you stand up and declare your ultimate and exclusive allegiance, faith allegiance to Christ, that you will be persecuted. His churches aren't being persecuted, so therefore he knows his churches aren't witnessing. So a church that's comfortable and quiet in his context is a church that is not witnessing. So what I've done is to look at that language and that concern and apply it to our contemporary circumstance. When we think about what it means to witness to the lordship of Jesus Christ in a situation where African Americans, particularly as we talked about in that statement, George Floyd, but we know there are many other persons, Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner. I mean, I could go on with a list, Breonna Taylor, who was in Louisville. There's a long list of persons in that context. It is not just them, but it is the system of systemic racism that has allowed a culture to allow persons in the culture with certain abilities and authorities to respond in unjust ways to particular people based on their lack of respect for who they are as people based on the color of their skin. So how do we then, knowing that that is not the intended understanding that God has for this creation, that is not the way in which the world reveals how God understands the world intended to be revealed in the life of Jesus of Nazareth, the kind of world we're committed to if we are committed to the lordship of Jesus Christ. How do we, in the midst of that circumstance, witness to the lordship of Jesus Christ? I'm arguing that if we are too quiet, it's a circumstance very much like John and his 7 churches. He knows if you're quiet, you're not speaking out against the circumstance that is negative for this revelation of God's intent in the world. If we are quiet as Christians, while we know a circumstance has taken place and is continuing to take hold, in this case, systemic racism that does not reflect God's intentions for our world, we then too are not witnessing to the lordship of Jesus Christ. So what I was saying in that piece was, one, I look at myself first and say, I have to recognize I have not witnessed enough, because I have many cases wanted to hold on to normalcy and not feel like I'm stepping out too far on a limb, and because of that I've not witnessed enough. So I want to start with myself, but I also want to look at the world of white Christians, as I say in that reflection, and argue that this community that has a tremendous amount of respect, authority, economic wherewithal, and political and legislative connection, that if they are quiet in this moment, they are not witnessing to the lordship of Jesus Christ, and to try to help them figure out and help me figure out how I can make that witness better. So it's a theological, biblical understanding that lives itself out in a current social and political circumstance. People come to church and come to faith with the hope that they can find comfort. that they can find peace, that they can find a sense of stability. So it is against the expectation of many people of faith to believe that my faith is going to make me uncomfortable, because I seek it out because I'm looking for comfort in my relationship with God, my relationship with Christ as a Christian. So when you then change that and to suggest that it's not just about being comfortable, it's also about finding a way to bring comfort and hope to those who are without it and who have historically been without it. So the healing, exercising reality of the Gospels is also a part of our understanding and identity as Christian believers. Jesus's healing and exorcisms in the Gospel of Mark, you know, I also work a good bit in the Gospel of Mark. Those are moments where we think, well, yes, that brings a great deal of calm and comfort to the person who has been possessed or the person who is broken. But what we also know when you read those texts is that whenever Jesus heals and exorcises, people get mad, they get angry, because it transforms the circumstance. It reconfigures relationship in those circumstances. It makes us think a different way about purity and holiness and who can be pure and who can be holy. And all of those changes and transformations are not just the physical in sense of the healings and the exorcisms, but it's a renewed sense of personhood that challenges the established understanding of what it means to be a person in the first century. So I look at what we're called to do is to reimagine and represent healing and exorcism in our lives as Christians today. No, that doesn't mean we go around looking for demons to pull demons out of people who possess, but it does mean that we go look for those circumstances where evil is manifest and find ways to cast it out. And that can create as much turmoil for us in our circumstance as it did for Jesus in his circumstance. I think systemic racism is an evil that possesses. If you encounter, engage, and try to exercise, that may look good for the person who is a victim of racism, but it can also cause a great deal of disruption in the societal circumstance in which you and that person are found. So it's not just about comfort, it's about bringing comfort, and sometimes bringing comfort brings trouble.
Good morning. Thanks again for joining us this morning. I am in this Zoom room with a variety of lay leaders from our Social Justice Forum and Adult Education Council, and some of you are welcome to join us as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about what Blount has spoken to us about this past year. You had seen a variety of questions on the slide. We're going to focus on two areas in this conversation. Sort of that first question of what keeps us from witnessing more, what keeps us, from stepping out into discomfort and into a place of perhaps things that might make us a little bit afraid. So we'll begin the conversation with that, and then we'll transition to what are our realms of influence? Where do we wield power? And how can we as individuals and as the church, specifically as Westminster, how can we enter into greater witness? We are here in downtown Minneapolis, where we share streets with the same officers, with the same people who were involved in the killing of George Floyd, and with the community that was impacted by it and continues to be impacted. So certainly our place of witness is maybe even especially pertinent to the events and conversation of the past year. So thank you so much for being here, lay leaders. One thing to note is that we have this automatically on speaker view, so you won't need to worry about being on the live stream camera unless you are speaking. But if you do speak, we ask that you put your camera on. It just makes it a little bit easier for the live stream audience then to participate in a full way. So I'm going to just go ahead and start the conversation with that first question. What is it that, what fears do we have about bearing witness? What particularly keeps us from a place of greater witness? And you can just jump in. I will call on you if you're raising your hand, but if you see it your opportunity, go ahead and unmute yourself and feel free to jump right in.
Hi, this is Phil Asgian, and I guess as I was thinking about this question, I think in terms of what makes me afraid to respond to racism, I guess it would be a lack of understanding and trusted relationships with other peoples.
That's really important. Do other people identify with that sense of not feeling the connection of relationship, making it difficult to step forward?
Well, this is Michelle. I don't really, I think I agree with Phil on that context that we aren't really walking in their shoes. We haven't experienced their history. We have just experienced the people, the white being overpowering to people of color. And that's kind of our framework. And I think I'm trying really hard. I think others in our church are trying really hard to understand that. But I also feel some aspects of vulnerability until other people get on the bandwagon. I feel like if I speak out, am I saying the wrong thing? Or maybe honestly, I'm not knowledgeable enough where I'm saying things that maybe I don't have the depth of knowledge I need to take action.
So
I think that's a really, Gretchen, go ahead.
the one thing that frightens me is how this time of awareness and readiness might pass, and we will have done nothing but try and learn. And I think it's so important for us to be learning and to listening and trying to form those relationships that we don't feel we have deep enough. But I'm afraid of us doing all that preparatory work and never getting to action, or losing this moment when we should be acting and learning and listening all at the same time. It's not a 1 + 1 + 1. It's not a straight line. It's a circular activity. And I think the more we combine those activities, the richer our relationships will be, and we will move beyond a sedentary state that could be our downfall.
Do we sometimes miss the good because we want the perfect, or because we're trying so hard to get it just right that we kind of neglect to do that first tough step, or those first few tough steps?
This is Ken Huskins. I guess one of my fears is being perceived as insincere. I've had several conversations with people, both person to person as well as online. And I don't know whether it's people that are just being challenging to be challenging, but they say, well, you live out near Lake Minnetonka, you have a nice home, you go to a church that's pretty affluent. If you really believe in these things, why don't you give up your job to somebody who better would need it? Or why don't you do this, that, or the other? And I don't feel real prepared, other than perhaps my normal nature of being confrontational and perhaps being angry about it, but I don't feel real prepared into how to talk about my faith in that way without being really challenged as being insincere.
Thanks, Ken. I think you all have covered a wide variety of the things that probably many of us hold in common as fears. I'm interested in maybe asking a little bit more about what do you think? What do you think there's like a sense of in our place at Westminster, and we are a primarily white congregation, we're relatively affluent. Do you think there are some kind of unique things that hold this kind of community back that maybe that we need to really account for in pursuing witness.
This is Michelle. I think one thing is we need to stop being quite so Presbyterian and stop talking about it all the time. I think Gretchen's point is very salient, that we can talk and we can inform and we can educate, but we need to get our boots on the ground, start having relationships with people of color that are not just comfortable. I think it's going to get uncomfortable, and not expect them to help us figure this out, because they've been victimized by this. I just think we just need to take action. We need to start, and we need to keep doing what we're doing for social justice and adult ed, but I think we also need to say, these are the things we're going to do next week. Sign up, and it doesn't mean we sign up and be together because of COVID, but there are things that we can do that do not mean we need to meet together to do it.
Well, I think, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that back to the question about fear, and I think it relates to the current question too, is that I am a mother of a Black son, and I have told my story so many times that I am afraid that people are going to say, oh, there she goes again, referring to her son. And we adopted him from Vietnam. He's an African-American Vietnamese. We adopted when he was 3. And I have watched and experienced racism through him and with him in every possible way, including at church. Oh, who is this with you today? And he lives in Dallas, so he's not with me every day, but it's just the struggle of trying to be, the other aspect, I think, is we can sign up to do something tomorrow, but I think we need to listen. We need to listen to the Cameroonians who are in our church and what they have experienced. And it's not been all positive. So I think we need to listen to, and then form relationships and go from there.
Thanks, Shirley. Phil, did you have something else to say?
Well, I was just going to say, in terms of what other things that we can do, and this kind of builds on the resources that we have available too. I think we can invite more voices to the table. And for example, technology through this pandemic has forced all types of congregations of people of every skin tone and culture to get onto Zoom and other tools. It's easier now maybe to invite them to join us in some fashion or another, maybe than it's even been before. And so I think we need to look for more ways to invite people into the life of the church.
I think Phil is transitioning. Oh, I'm sorry, Sylvia. I see Sylvia and Rick Moore, and then also Kathleen. Sylvia, what would you like to add?
I wanted to echo some of what Phil and Shirley both said, that I think it's really important to be ready to act, but to ask questions first. I'd like to be able to be in a position where I can ask questions and really listen to the answers and act in an informed way rather than just act for the sake of acting. If I act, I can make all kinds of mistakes and I can apologize up front and say, I know I'm going to make mistakes, but I got to do something. Well, that's okay, but maybe I can take the next step if I get the opportunity to really ask the question, really listen to the answer, and then act. I hope I get that chance.
Thank you. Kathleen, did you also have something to add? You're on mute still, unfortunately. Thank you.
I think people are making excellent points about the need to listen as well as act. One of the things that I'm hesitant about is to be a member of, well, to be a white person who is part of a group that sees themselves as fixers. Like, let us come in and take charge and fix this. And that makes me very, and that's a different kind of discomfort. I know we're talking about the need to feel uncomfortable sometimes, but I think taking over and saying, let us do this, and it just is something to really hesitate about, I think. I mean, I don't know what I'm trying to say. That's it.
Thanks, Kathleen. I see Gretchen has her hand raised. Gretchen, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was thinking about this call to action, which I have always strongly felt a call to action on many fronts, but I think we often think of the call to action to move out there and fix stuff out there. And as several comments have been made here, we probably have some stuff to fix that we could work on right inside of our own collective. The Council of Churches is looking at reparations. It's looking at our endowments and where they came from and what policy should we think about in terms of what are we built upon? What's the foundation we're built upon? Where did it come from? What can we do to grapple with that? So I think that it's not necessarily only wading into other spheres, but also looking internally, just as Ken, your whoever your acquaintances, colleagues challenged you to, look at your own sense of privilege. I think we at Westminster can use some of our energy on this topic to do similar introspection and change as a result.
Thanks, Gretchen. I saw Brent also had his hand up.
I think Gretchen raises a really good point. I think we have to look at this as a very long journey, right? And it's both a micro and a macro level response that is required. I think there's, it's not going to be one thing, right? In a journey of 1,000 steps or 1,000,000 steps, you're going to step off the path a few times. That doesn't mean you should wait in a holding pattern before you take your first step. I think some micro level things, Rachel has been great about saying, hey, all church book read, let's find a special book we can only get at an African-American owned bookstore. Maybe we should all be patronizing more African-American owned businesses or people of businesses owned by people of color. That's a small thing that we can do. I also, though, in our own house, and Gretchen was right about talking about that, I certainly am fully capable of calling the mayor of Edina, where I live, tomorrow and saying, Jim, I'm concerned that for a long time we've pulled over people in Edina in cars with busted taillights because they were driving in Edina while poor, right? And that's not acceptable. And we need to stop that. And what's your plan to stop doing that? And how are we tracking that? That's a conversation I can have as a 25-year resident of the city that, I don't have to go to a study group. I don't have to ask any of my African-American friends or acquaintances of color whether or not they think that's a good or bad thing to do. I can just do that and own it. And all of us, I think, need to do both, act on the micro and the macro level.
Thanks for that. It sounds like we're kind of moving into that next part of the conversation. Where are your the realms where you have some power, where you wield influence, and what kinds of steps could we think about taking in those realms? Really concrete steps, I think, would be great to talk about. We can share some of those with each other and with others watching on the live stream.
Well, this is Michelle. I'd like to share one because it comes to mind even before, the incidents with George Floyd and leading up to that. I'm really involved in a national pain management for nursing organization, and I was on the planning committee, and part of their title was diversity. And I said, tell me more about your word diversity and why is it in this topic of pain management? Is it treating diverse populations? Is it oh, they said, no, it's just pain management strategies. And I said, I think we need to go broader. I mean, I'm right across, it was supposed to be, our conference was supposed to be right across the church where I go to church, right? I said, I think we need to go broader because there are people that we treat that don't have the same outcomes with their pain management. And that just blew everything out of the water. And we offered a lot, and we had actually small group discussions on bias and racism, and it was really well received. So that's one thing I did, and I talk about it more with my colleagues.
Rachel.
Hi, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, this is David. I just wanted to say a couple things of what we're doing here at the senior co-op where we live. We have recently developed what we're calling a diversity action working group. There's real concern among a lot of us because we are all, with a couple of exceptions, white people, and that's concerning that we're not more diverse here. There's lots of reasons for that, but we've got a group that's intentionally working on exploring ways that we can encourage people and encourage diversity amongst our members, and to sensitize our members, and also to reach out. One other thing we're doing is we've got an art committee. We are very proud of the fact that we have artworks hanging on our walls throughout the hallways in our building. And we've tried to find art that's more representational of Indigenous and African-American artists and subject matter. And that is happening, and it's being very well received. So I think at least internally, that's a way that we have sort of helped each other to be more sensitive to these issues.
Those are some great examples. Emily, you unmuted yourself. Do you have something to say?
Yes. I think a large area that I've tried to focus on as far as wielding power is fiscally. Kind of as Brent had mentioned, trying to put my money towards Black-owned organizations and businesses in the Twin Cities, especially trying to go from the local level up. And also taking away my business from corporations that may utilize prison labor, considering that prisons disproportionately affect people of color as well. So being aware of where your money goes, whether it's either being a consumer or even donations to local organizations, that's a big thing to focus on, especially during the pandemic, where it is fortunate to have a job as well.
Thank you. Ken, go ahead.
I was going to say something similar to what Emily just said. So I'll only include the fact that doing a portfolio analysis for retirement. I'm retired now, but I'm much more considering where my investments are and have actually made some changes to that. And that's in combination with supporting Black or Indigenous or people of color businesses, and looking more carefully at where I invest my charitable contributions as well.
I see Martha and then Kathleen.
So I was reflecting on this question and really feeling like I didn't have wield much power, just because of a lot of reasons. a job that isn't paying much, so fiscally is hard to do that, and just not having much influence even in my realm of work, at least because I don't get to make decisions. And so, as in a property management company, and so listening to ideas is really helpful, but it's can be, I think for some of us, can be very difficult to find that place of where do we have power? Yes, I'm a white woman, so I have power, but in the system, where does that leave me when I don't have the sense that I can do something?
Thanks, Martha. Kathleen, did you have something to add as well?
Yeah, just we have this long-term relationship with Liberty Church, and I really like it that we do. But I just sometimes wonder if there's something, and they are very, very busy. My goodness, they have a ton of issues. It's huge. But I just wonder sometimes if there are ways that we could partner with them that we haven't explored yet, that would be not so much church to church as, 1-to-1 or 4-to-4, or do you know what I mean? I just wonder if there are wonderful people at that church and we don't know them. We know the two pastors. We don't know very many of the people who go there. And I just wonder if there's something there. It's a very rich environment, even though it's not rich financially. And gosh, what could we do? And yet then I think, well, but then we're asking them for something and I don't know, it becomes very confusing in my mind.
I can understand these are hard issues, and there's a lot of dynamics at play here. Martha brought up the idea of kind of wondering where do we wield power and influence in our areas, and how sometimes it can be difficult to identify those. I just want to make a plug for some adult ed programming that we're going to be presenting in the spring. We're hoping to gather roundtables according to vocation, and inviting an outside expert to come and share how they have in their own lives, in whatever calling they are, whether it's family life, community life, healthcare, business, wherever they have been called, how have they taken steps to dismantle privilege and move towards justice? So something you can hopefully join us in discussing later this spring. And if you have a story or would be interested in participating in those roundtables, please let me or Brent or somebody else on Adult Ed Council know. We'd love to integrate more Westminster voices into those discussions. We're hoping it really can be a peer learning opportunity. We've got some great experts that are willing to share their knowledge with us. So looking forward to that. And Kathleen, you're kind of transitioning us maybe towards this question of what can we as a community do together? We're a body, and we have as a body a certain level of responsibility, a certain level of influence, a certain level of power. And so what kinds of things can we do? What have we done? And what can we do? What have we done well? What haven't we done so well? And what can we do better as we move forward?
This is Phil Askin again. I mean, I think we have been engaged quite a bit, and that's great. If you look at the work with the community partners and the interfaith downtown clergy, for example, there's been a lot of good community interaction. I just put in the chat on the live stream several resources, and I just wanted to kind of call out a couple different options there, particularly the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition. I've got the link there to their webpage. They have a lot of opportunities to be engaged. And that's something we could do at multiple levels to mirror Brent's comments. Could be done at the macro level or the micro level.
That's a great list of resources. Thanks for sharing that with all of us. Gretchen, did you have something to add? I noticed you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I was thinking about Martha's comments and several others. And I think this might apply, my notion might apply to us personally and then collectively as well. And I think part of what is useful in these times is to notice something that seems out of whack and to give voice to what we have noticed. And it sounds small, but it's really large. I think Brent's example was a noticing and giving voice. I am a person who has a position that in this day and time, I have the privilege of influence to some degree because I'm Commissioner of Health for the city and we've got a pandemic and people are interested in what I have to say. But even in such a role, I think noticing and giving voice is important. We are trying to get the vaccine out to people who are disproportionately impacted, and certainly seniors are in that category. People of color are in that category as well. And yet the processes we're using to distribute the vaccines seem to be easier to access for people who have computers and internet and relatives that are helpful, have time to be helpful. And so privileged white elderly people are the ones that are pictured in line for a vaccine. Just noticing that, even though others are noticing it, of course, but giving voice to noticing that and having others say, oh yeah, yes, we've got a plan for diversity. It'll be ready in a couple weeks. And even in that answer, it feels so charged with with systemic racism. And so I think we can do that individually, but I think collectively as a church, there may be things that we could just notice and give voice to in a public sphere that won't change the world, but will push well-intentioned people maybe to work at a different speed or bring about a different outcome.
Hi, Rick, go ahead.
In the idea of noticing things, our Star Tribune and other sources are giving more voice to Black organizations, featuring them. And I think a lot of us don't know how we can get involved. And I think we just keep our eyes and ears open. You'll see things in the newspaper that are featured that allow opportunities to do that. One example is there was a Black-owned business in North Minneapolis that was featured. And they had a GoFundMe page because they were expanding and partnering with Dogwood Coffee, which is one of my favorite coffee shops in town. And they're going to be opening, actually it's in Camden, northern part, and opening in the spring, expanding their business. So we just went to the GoFundMe page and made a small donation. So it's not a lot of money, but it's a way to partner with a Black-owned business. In addition to that, that same person, Houston White, has a clothing line which was put into just one Target store, the one on Lake Street that was damaged and just reopened. It's kind of a pilot program. So we're trying to support things like that. It's hard to find opportunities where you can do that. But I think if we keep our eyes open, you'll see opportunities from time to time.
Those are great examples. Thanks for sharing. Are there, Ken, go ahead.
Maybe this is changing the topic a little bit or changing the direction a little bit, but I want to go back to what Reverend Blount said in those video clips, and that is that witness is taking our ability and our comfort and sharing that comfort with others. He also noted, though, that in so doing, there is this pushback from the rest of society. You know, the evil empire of Rome wants to remain Rome. And so we can, and I realize that this is an enormous challenge, and we should be focusing on helping others who have been disadvantaged lived with injustice to be more comfortable using his term. But at some point, our witness needs to also turn to those that are, white or others that don't see it the same way we do. And I have to believe that there's a large population of people out there when you look at our current politics, when you look at the membership at mainline churches, people who perhaps might think like we do. Is that something that we should just ignore at this point because there's so much work to be done to share our comfort with other disadvantaged members or children of God in our world? Or do we need to also have some strategies that using our influence to influence the Christians who don't believe the way that we do or don't act the same way that we do? I'm just throwing that out there. Where does our witness begin? And how much of our witness should be directed towards those that are parts of our society that are not interested in participating now?
I think that's a great question, Ken. I'm remembering the Gretchen's idea of noticing and sharing. What we're noticing. I think sometimes I know I have conversations with friends or family where something doesn't sit right, and I could be more quick to say, "Hey, I just noticed you said that. Tell me more about that." I heard an interesting, and maybe some of you heard it as well, an interesting series on NPR about, it was actually in reference to the folks who are kind of widespread belief in conspiracy theories and how we can talk to our friends and family who have deeply embedded views that are difficult for them to recognize as being based on something dangerous or false. And so one of the things I thought was really interesting about that was just how absolutely relational it was, gentle kind of incremental steps towards better understanding and based on respect. And so that, I think there's something about that was really encouraging, even though it wasn't a big giant solution, it was so human. It gave me hope. I'm wondering if others have any thoughts on what Ken said about, what can we do or how much should we do of influencing other white people or other privileged people?
Rachel, I think that's an interesting point. I guess I have friends all around the country from some business groups that I'm in. And after George Floyd's killing, a few of them called me and they heard about the riots and things like that. And with some of them, there was a little bit of a narrative of, well, he had a criminal record and it could have been a violent situation for police. And I sort of stopped them right there. And I said, wait a minute, because I know them, right? You've got a 16-year-old son. I've got a 21-year-old son. My son and I, and your son and you, walk out of that situation alive 100 out of 100 times. I'm not going to accept your narrative of, oh, well, it was probably, it's like, no, this was a terrible, terrible thing. And if I can peel away the edges of some of the systems that they're in, if I can give them a narrative that they're not hearing in the silos of information that they exist in, well, I think it's a small thing to do. It's very easy, but I think we all do need to push back, as you said, push back at the edges and say, the uncle or the aunt or the friend in the family, and we all have them, who wants to, go down some conspiracy rabbit hole. It's important for us to say, you get your own opinions, you don't get your own facts, right? To quote Daniel Patrick Moynihan. And it's a small thing that we can do. But as Gretchen even said, we all have to notice. And when you hear that, or your comment of, you use kind of an interesting word there. What did you mean by that? And sort of elicit that out and, be vulnerable. And when you put things in the context that people can relate to, when I mentioned my friend's son, he was like, wow, yeah, I can't even imagine my son having a payment issue at a convenience store and ending up dead. You're right. That was totally different than what I'm used to.
Sylvia, go.
I think we're very used to the idea of, somebody said earlier, excuse me, earlier, of going around and trying to fix things. And we want something to do that's going to fix a humongous historic problem. There's not one fix, but I keep hearing all these wonderful ideas of, but there's this and there's this and there's this. And we never know what seeds we plant are going to take root and really flourish into something important. I'm glad that people are willing to plant seeds. We may not see what happens as a result, but if we could keep planting, just keep planting. And it doesn't have to be confrontational, and it doesn't have to be nasty, and it doesn't have to be argumentative. It can just be like Rachel said, what did you mean by that? I'm curious. Could you tell me more about that? I have an idea that's different. Can I tell you? I think that the relational interactions that we have are probably some of the most important things we can do. Systemic things that we can't push back on. Like Martha said, I can't go out there and push back an institution. Yeah, but I bet you know somebody. And I bet I know somebody that I could say something to that I haven't said. And it's, you never know what seeds that are planted could take root, flourish, and change the world. Go for it. I love what I'm hearing.
Thanks for that. Sylvia, Shirley, I noticed you unmuted yourself. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just agree with what Sylvia said about relationships. I had a friend who lives in the same apartment building I do, and notice I said friend because the first time I met her, she attacked me because of something I said about John Lewis. I thought his memorial service was so wonderful. And she said, oh, you must be a Democrat. And then she just went on, and you know, all Democrats are going to hell. And she went on and on about she believed Trump was put in place just such a place by God. He was president because God wanted him to be. Well, I was very upset by that attack, but I thought, you know what? She moved in at the beginning of the pandemic. She doesn't have a friend. Maybe I could help her. So I've done small things to help her. She moved here from Florida, so she didn't have a doctor, and I recommended one. And so I feel that it's a small seed, like Sylvia said, but we're doing more things. You know, she'll call me and say something, or she gave me some flowers that she had picked. And I tried to respond in like way. And so that's just one thing, I think, a relationship. And she said, Shirley, I don't know why you're so nice to me. And I said, because I see God's image in you. And so that was my answer.
Kindness matters. I see Emily put some a list of Black-owned businesses in the live stream chat, and we also have some comments in the live stream chat about further dreaming about how to engage with Liberty and even just being present in the pews on a Sunday at Liberty once it's safe to do so. We only have a very few minutes left, probably just 2 or 3 before we need to wrap it up. But I'm wondering if we haven't touched that much on kind of the institution, Westminster as an institution. I'm wondering if anyone would like to, or maybe we can even just like popcorn a few quick ideas or dreams about Westminster and what we might do better to either support the kind of witness that you offer in your communities, or to, as a community, bear better witness.
I'm wondering if there are ways where we can use some of the examples that have come up in this conversation as yeast within our own congregation. And so giving ideas and examples to others that will, one, help them see what they might already be doing in their lives and connect it to this, and two, give them ideas of how they might go further, and how we collectively might go further. And so even just some regular little snippets about things like this, or I don't know what the vehicle is, but some ongoing sharing.
You know, one way we might be able to do that is maybe initiating more community conversations. And they could be online, they could be in person, whatever. And they could maybe be focused around issues that can lead to some more concrete actions, you know, like things around education or housing or whatever. Just a thought.
So I get these weekly news blasts from different organizations, and I think Westminster does that too, you know, or they will send something out on an email, and maybe it should be more on the forefront, like, what have you done this week? Just thinking about it. You know, if we bring it up all the time and then maybe have things that are available for people to take action, even if it's just as simple as like what someone had mentioned about donating to a GoFundMe page or something where it's very intentional, that might be helpful.
I see Kathleen, and then Elizabeth, I'm not sure if you had a comment or not. I see you unmuted yourself as well. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Yeah, I do. I really like Michelle's idea, and I wonder if we could, for ideas for taking action, could there be on our Westminster website an area like a bulletin board or something like that where people could put in their ideas, like the ones that Michelle just mentioned, and lots of others. Maybe somebody would have to filter it. Somebody at church would have to filter it before it just pops out there. But I just think that's a great idea, whether it's a GoFundMe page or a Black business that is wonderful and that you could patronize, or a chance to have a conversation with somebody at Liberty Church, or mentoring possibilities. Just, I don't know, just ideas. I just love that idea of suggestions coming from us as a congregation. It of course, it doesn't always have to be top down. We have, that's what this whole conversation has been about. We have power, we have will, we have the ability to take action too.
Thanks, Kathleen. How about Elizabeth? You will have probably the last word from our panel, and then I'm going to give a preview of next week. Phil, I'm looking at your face to see, is next week also joint? Is Social Justice Forum also joining the Brian Blount discussion next week, or are you guys doing something else?
No, we're planning to do a joint discussion next week as well with you.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So go ahead, Elizabeth, and please share your idea.
Following up on Kathleen, we do have that faith in action that Elena puts out. We could talk to her about filtering those ideas. But I was thinking we could encourage, see if any of the kids from Liberty want to go to Oshawa, or if maybe the women want to get together in a women's retreat or a support group. We tried that several years ago when Liberty started, and in fact, we had a spa day for them. But that kind of fell through because they got too busy and couldn't make many of our get-togethers. So that kind of ended. But, you know, that's worth another try. And we do need mentors up in the school. So those who might want to mentor can give me a call and I'll talk to them, or we could go from there. Also, they have the Healing Center up in the north, and they would certainly need some help with volunteering there also, especially making lunches for the ladies when they have their support groups. So I can talk to Elena about that.
That sounds great. Thanks, Elizabeth. So as I mentioned, next week, we will be viewing a panel discussion, a small group facilitated by Matt Skinner with Brian Blount, focused on it's Transfiguration Sunday, so the focus is on Transfiguration. The title is Glimpsing Glory, a conversation with Brian Blount about the transfiguration of Jesus and its implications. So please join us again next week for that. I want to thank all of you who joined us today, and I hope that let's put some of these great ideas into place and look forward to continuing the conversation about how we actually do this concretely. So thanks to you all. I'm going to put up the slide about next week, and we'll mute from here on out. Thanks.